Hi everybody. So today we're going to read chapter 2 of King Arthur, and this is about the birth of Arthur. So Arthur's parents were King Uther Pendragon. So if we remember from the last chapter, he was the king that overthrew, I can't speak today, overthrew first king, who was named Vortigern. And he married a woman named Igraine. And how this all came about had to do with Merlin. And Merlin had made a promise to Uther that he would eventually marry Igraine, but that there would be a price eventually. Alright, so after the marriage, King Uther Pendragon and his sweet and lovely lady Igraine lived very happily in Tintagel Castle by the Cornish Sea. You may see the ruins of it now, but you can never imagine perhaps how fine and strong it was in those days, hundreds of years ago. Massive gray towers rose above great gray roofs, and archers practiced shooting from the strong high walls. Sometimes the big gates and doors were closed, sometimes they opened wide to let out large companies of soldiers, dressed in bright armor and riding on handsome, spirited horses with gay bridles and reins. In the evening, sounds of music and laughter came from inside. Minstrels with harps played and sang to the king. Oh, it was a wonderful place, was Tintagel. And you will never see anything like it nowadays. Folks were brave and cheerful then, and though they no doubt had terrific battles with their neighbors, they were so happy and courageous between times that their lives passed as happily as possible. What with work and play, and banquets and tournaments. The knights loved and fought for fair ladies, the fair ladies loved and looked after the knights. And bravest, most loving, and fairest of all were King Uther Pendragon and Igraine, the queen. As the days passed, they were very happy together at Tintagel, and by their little son was born. Poor Igraine was now told that Uther had promised to give the baby instantly into Merlin's charge. She was very sad about this, but she would not ask the king to break his word. Besides, she and Uther had often talked about the great future which Merlin had foretold for their child. So the king and queen kissed the baby prince, and the queen herself wrapped him in a beautiful cloth of gold and gave him into the charge of 2 ladies and 2 knights. Then Uther told them to carry the tiny prince to a certain little half-hidden door in the castle wall, to open this door softly and silently, and to give the child into the arms of somebody who would be waiting just outside to receive it. Singing soft little lullabies, the 2 ladies stepped carefully down the corridor, followed by the 2 knights. They reached the winding stairs and went down, down, down to the little half-hidden door. On a golden cushion, one lady carried the sleeping baby in its golden cloak. The other carried a tall candle, and the 2 knights walking behind carried 2 more candles, taller still, which cast strange wavering shadows on the gray doors. They opened the door, and the light of the candle shone out into the dark, still night. From among the shadows came a dim, tall figure, not unlike a shadow itself. This figure held out its arms for the baby, and the ladies and the knights, without a word, gave the tiny boy into the stranger's arms, and thus was Arthur. Then they went back through the door with their candles and the empty golden cushion, and as they climbed up the winding staircase, they slowly heard in the distance the footsteps of a trotting horse. On the horse rode Merlin with the baby. Over hill and dale he went until he reached a quiet small castle in a valley. Here lived a good and sober knight called Sir Hector, who knew well why Merlin had come. Long ago the magician and King Uther had sent for Sir Hector and asked him if he would receive a little child into his house. A little child who was to become very great and famous, but who must be brought up simply as a noble knight's son. Sir Hector had consented and had been given lands and riches in return. So when Merlin rode up in the dark night, Sir Hector and his wife met the magician gladly and took the baby straight to their own nursery. Then Merlin had the little prince christened Arthur, and Sir Hector brought him up in his own good, peaceful, and happy home. But Merlin was always at hand, watching over the boy. His father, King Arthur, was content to leave little Arthur in the great wizard's charge. However, when he was dying, he sent for Merlin and asked for news of the child. How happy he was when he heard that Prince Arthur was growing up into a beautiful little boy, already asking to ride his horse, hunt with his hounds, and shoot his arrows with the others. How much better it was that he should later be brought up just as a good knight instead of as the king's favorite son. Uther listened happily, certain now that his sacrifice of his baby had not been made in vain. Then he gave back to Merlin the Round Table, which, as you shall hear, had been placed in his care, and told him how it might be kept safe and soundly until Arthur came. Accordingly, Merlin had it carried far away to Camerland, where it was placed in the care of another old friend of Uther's, under another great king, whose name was Leodogran, who in his turn gave it to the charge of 250 knights, all of them brave, noble, and good. What happened to it afterward you will hear in another story. So Uther died, but nobody knew that the little lad in Sir Hector's house was the dead king's son and heir. The barons of the country began to quarrel tooth and nail among themselves. Each of them wanted the power to rule over the rest. Never was there such an uncomfortable commotion. Wherever you went, you met soldiers on horseback shaking their spears and shouting out fine speeches about their own baron, and angry speeches about the barons of other people. The woods and the meadows rang with the sounds of steel and the thunder of horses' feet, so that at last Merlin went to the archbishop, who mourned over these things very sorrowfully in his lonely palace of peace, and told him to call all the warring barons to London for Christmas, that they might go to the service in the church and forget their quarrels, if only for the short and gentle hours of Christmas Day. The barons dared not disobey the archbishop, so to London and to church they duly went. After the service, out streamed the congregation into the churchyard, and there they saw something that had assuredly not been visible when they went in. At the extreme east of the churchyard, lit by the pale Christmas sun, stood a stone as white as marble, but 1,000 times more beautiful. In the center of it was a square of steel like an anvil, and from the steel rose the glittering handle of a strong, sharp sword. In the letters of gold about the sword were written strange and thrilling words which said that whoever could draw the sword out of the stone was King of Britain, Uther Pendragon's only rightful heir. The barons crowded around the stone, wide-eyed and amazed. Each called out that he, if given the chance, was certainly the one and only chieftain who could draw the sword from the stone. Smiling oddly, Merlin, who stood near, bade them all try. Jostling one another in their hurry, they sprang one by one to the side of the stone, seized the handle of the sword, and pulled and tugged with all their might. But their efforts met with no success. The sword did not even tremble in its square of steel, while the gleaming golden letters written around it seemed to mock the barons with their quiet, sure message. At last the barons, tired and angry, went away from the churchyard and began to amuse themselves by holding a tournament in some meadows not very far away. After all, it was Christmas time, the season of joust and knightly games, and riding to the tournament as a matter of course came Sir Hector, his son, Sir Kay, and the fair and noble boy Arthur, whom Sir Hector loved as much as his own child. As they passed the churchyard, they saw the sword, shining always in the stone that was like a beautiful and white marble, and they spoke to each other of the strangeness of the sight. Then they trotted forward, each on a handsome horse. But just as they were about to ride into the meadow, so bright with banners and happy voices, Sir Kay exclaimed, in utter dismay, that he could not take share in the delights of the tournament, for he had left his own sword at home. "Turn your horse quickly, my son," said Hector to young Arthur. "Gallop home and bring your brother's sword. You are too young for the knightly games, but he must on no account be left out of them." Arthur did not wait to be told a second time. Home he went at full speed to fetch his older brother's sword. But when he reached the house, everything was lonely and locked up. Sir Hector's lady had gone to the tournament herself and taken all the servants with her. For a minute or two Arthur hesitated. Then he was struck with the very happiest thought. "I will go to the churchyard," said he, "and take the sword that is sticking out of the big white stone. It will do just as well for my brother as his own." So he mounted his horse again, and off to the churchyard he rode. Dismounting, he hastened towards the great stone. There, not even pausing to read the words which were written in the golden letters, he took the sword by the handle and pulled. Lo and behold, the sword came out as easily and lightly from the steel in the middle of the marble as a rose is plucked from the delicate green shelter of its bush. Sword in hand, Arthur once more sprang into the saddle and galloped away to the tournament. Over the meadow grass he trotted, and straight into the hands of Sir Kay he gave the sword. Then, like the light-hearted, modest boy he was, he fell back among the other younglings, watching to see his elder brother's triumph with an eager and delighted expectancy. But Sir Kay was staring with all of his eyes at the sword. He turned it this way and that, and then rode off to where his father also watched from a distance. Sir, he said to Sir Hector, this sword which young Arthur has brought to me is the very sword that no baron could draw from the stone in the east of the churchyard. You have heard what is written around it in letters of gold? I have heard, said Sir Hector, grave and startled, for he too had been told the story of the sword set so firmly in the beautiful white stone. He too recognized the fair blade as it glittered in his son's hand. If this is so, sir, cried Sir Kay with a glowing face, then I must be the King of Britain, Uther Pendragon's heir. But Sir Hector, deep in thought, had turned his horse's head. Call your brother Arthur, he said, and both of you follow me. In silence he rode to the churchyard, and in silence Kay and Arthur followed him. When they had all dismounted near the stone, Sir Hector looked at Arthur, who stood quietly by. Put the sword back again, said he, and Arthur did so. Sir Hector turned then to Sir Kay. Draw it out, he commanded. But Sir Kay, when he put his hand to the sword, could do no more than any of the barons who had tried so hard. Then Sir Hector himself tried, and also failed. Tenderly he laid his hand on King Arthur's shoulder. It is your turn now. Show your brother the truth. So Arthur, still quite simply and naturally, reached out his young quick fingers, and taking the sword for the second time from the shining white stone, would have given it to Sir Hector's hand. But Sir Hector, instead of taking the sword, bent on one knee, and did Arthur homage, as all good knights do homage to their liege lord and king. My son, said he, and that I cannot help calling you, though you are not my son. The writing in the golden letters was set down upon the marble slab for you. Hail, Arthur, son of Uther Pendragon and King of Britain. Receive before all others the loyalty of those who love you best, Sir Hector, whom you have called father, and his son, your brother, Sir Kay. And that is the end of chapter 2. After this, we will read about the Round Table and Arthur becoming king.